My name's Tina, and I'm going to talk to you about my family culture, which is really hard for me to do. I don't really feel like I have much of a family culture. My parents divorced when before I was even born. So I didn't really know my dad. He didn't spend time with our family much at all. I'd see him occasionally at Christmas or something. I know his family is Danish, and my grandmother used to be an amazing cook. She made amazing food, owned this amazing restaurant in the tiny little town of Junction City. But that's kind of all I know about her and that family. I know the Danish people themselves have an amazing, rich history. I was never really exposed to that. My mom's family has a fascinating history, even if it is kind of weird. Culturally, what they brought with them versus what they developed into. So my mom's family, her dad's side, escaped off a reservation in Watauga, Oklahoma in the 1940s with their mother, who had killed my grandfather. So not 100% sure what happened there. The story's pretty sketchy, like everything else. They changed everything about themselves because Native Americans could not own property in Oregon at that time. And they didn't have a lot of money, but they scraped together and were very industrious and creative. So what they started doing was making and selling moonshine. And they were very, very good at it and ruthless enough to make a go of it, and literally everybody in the valley knew them and bought moonshine from them or worked for them delivering moonshine. Like it was crazy, the stories I heard in high school, even from people who were not my family. So I know that is true. You don't show up on those properties or out there unless you have an invitation, or you're going to be met with a gun. Like, that's my family culture would be. You don't ask too many questions about things, and you don't go places unless you've been invited. When me and my cousins started asking questions about our family history, we were told that we were Southern Cheyenne. That was kind of it. But then I went to Washington, D.C. later, and when I looked it up on the Baker rolls, my grandmother's last name was Matilda Baker, like it's the Dawes rolls of Oklahoma. What it said was that they could re-enroll and be tribal members again if they came back to the reservation, but there was no way they were doing that. And it listed them in Indian Territory being Comanche. Great-grandmother told everybody was that her husband, John Compton, was from England, from Compton Castle. And it turned out all of that was 100% for sure a lie. So we know that now. Definitely not true, because Compton Castle wasn't named after a family. It was named after the people who lived in, or this little town hamlet thing that the people lived in. My family was very successful at being moonshiners. They made enough money to buy quite a bit of property, and then they started growing the things you need to make moonshine. So they had fruit farms, and they had wheat and barley fields. And some of my family, my cousins, still own and operate some of those farms to this day. And there are still certain areas on Compton Lane that you still don't go to unless you're invited. Because my family was partially Native American, they were not permitted to own property. The towns have now kind of grown up around them, but where they were originally, it was way out there. And they made moonshine and were good at it. So people kind of just left them to it, I guess. The one thing that I think my family brought with them culturally that is still very important in my family is the love of horses and riding horses. We rode competitively for years. My sister won the Nationals Arabian Horse Show, Western Horse Show competition in Phoenix, Arizona in I think 2005. I rode competitively in dressage. Horses were a massive part of our lives. Even if we didn't have any money, even if we didn't have food in our house to feed us, we fed our horses, and we had horses, and they were a huge part of our lives. We would play games on them that I think were holdovers that my, grandfather and his brothers had, where we would ride bareback a lot. Like, we mostly rode bareback, over jumps, you know, ride through water and stuff, and see a good ride standing up. We played tag with whips. Things that most people would consider super dangerous. But we did that for fun. Those memories are pretty amazing because you look back on it and you're just like, wow, I did that? That's crazy. But it was a huge part of our family. My grandmother, she was born here in Montana, in Whitehall, Montana, in, I believe, the 1920s. All of the information about that, other than my grandmother's birth certificate, is 100% fake. My grandmother did attend a boarding school in Oregon until she was 13. Then she was placed with a wealthy family where she cleaned houses for them, to learn some proper girls' job skills or whatever it was. She got married to my grandfather when she was 17. And my grandfather, you know, he made moonshine. So they were rough criminals. My grandmother's was a sweet, tiny, tiny little lady with black hair and just the quietest person ever until you really made her mad. She was something else. But she also would take us every single weekend, and we would go out and we learned the plants. We learned how to use medicinal plants. We learned how to eat plants, which plants you could eat when, how to use them in medicine, how to make them into medicine, how to use yarrow, how to use deer fern, how to use chittum, how to use just everything. And it bore me and my sister a true love of herbalism, and we both now have a real passion for that. It just is something that I absolutely loved. I absolutely loved animals. I absolutely loved being outdoors. And that's something I hope culturally for my family that I hope we're building, that I have passed on to my children, is the absolute love of nature and how much it gives us and how much we should respect it. The one thing that comes to mind, like, my family hunts and fishes. My grandpa used to, after my grandfather and my grandmother got divorced, which was like this huge scandal, he started living in an Airstream that he pulled around behind a pickup truck and would feed us crunchy marshmallows if we found the neighbor lady shooting laser beams at him. Yeah, he's a little crazy. But he would take his trailer and he would go up and down the coast and he would fish. And he would fish for salmon or halibut or whatever. And then he would get clams and stuff. And then he would take that and sell it and then trade it for other things like raw cane sugar from Mexico or whatever. And then he'd go back and forth. That's like what he did. He went from place to place to place all the time. Very nomadic. So my family's pretty chaotic, and it's really hard for me to pin down a family culture because our family culture is basically, you know, I grew up really honestly with a lot of criminals in my family. There's definitely a culture, but it's a very different type. And that's not what I wanted to raise my kids in. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching.